Well, welcome to my second video in my new apartment. This time you actually get to see my face, and at some point you may actually get to see the rest of the apartment too. I don't know. Right now it's a bit of a mess because I'm still waiting for some furniture to be delivered because I have no place to put things in drawers. For some reason or other, they don't like kitchen drawers or bedroom drawers, so there's no place to put my cutlery or my smalls or whatever. So I bought a chest, well actually two different kinds of chests, and also a prep table and a drying rack and all kinds of stuff. That's coming this afternoon, so right now the floor is pretty much littered with my clothes and various other bits and pieces, and I've got to toss out all the boxes that I used to move here, and after today I'll be all settled and maybe I'll take you on a little tour. But right now I want to talk about change. I want to talk about the fact that I liked my old apartment in a lot of ways, and I didn't like it in a lot of ways. And my new apartment is almost the complete opposite. The things I liked about my old apartment I don't have here. And the things that I didn't like about my old apartment are completely different here, and I do like them. So let's talk about change. Well, I can start off just by talking a little bit about the things that are different about my new apartment. It's a lot brighter, for one thing, and like my old apartment, it does not face east, which is really important in the tropics. You don't want bright sunshine pouring into the apartment first thing in the morning and getting it all hot. My old apartment did face east on the kitchen side, but that was a long, long way from my bedroom and from the living area, and it had a door and a window that I could open, and so it was okay. And the living area faced west. It got very little sun, and so kept fairly cool and had a ceiling fan to help me. This apartment faces partially north and partially west, and there are buildings blocking the sun setting in the west. And because I'm in the tropics, it's mostly an overhead sun, so that the north face never gets any direct sun. So the apartment in general is pretty good in that respect, and the two apartments are even. But I have much more light in this apartment in general, not direct sunlight, but plenty of nice light, as you can see from this video. And it's white. I'm not quite sure about that. My old apartment was all wood. It had parquet flooring. It had generally a brown cast to all the furniture, rattan furniture and so forth. This is a much more modern feeling apartment. But the good part about it is that the kitchen is marvelous, and you saw that in the last video a little bit, and you'll see more of it. And it's right by the dining area, which is also very, very convenient. Disadvantage? The kitchen in my old apartment was all the way on the other side of the apartment from the dining area, which is not convenient in terms of transferring food, but was extremely convenient in terms of the heat that was produced by my oven and by the stove, so that all got dissipated out the back, and I could sit in relative comfort in the front part and the living part. We'll see yet. I don't know. When I roast or bake, I turn the oven way up, and there's usually a lot of smoke, and I'm expecting that the apartment's going to get filled with smoke. Also, the locations of the two apartments are diametrically opposite. The old apartment, I lived right behind the Royal Palace. I was right by the river. I was by a lot of parks and monasteries, pagodas, all very nice, and generally the shopping was pretty good. It's about even Stevens when it comes to shopping in this area. Here where I am now, I'm in this gentrifying area that is okay, but there's not really very much to see. I can go to one pagoda that's about 1.5 kilometers away. There's no river. There's nothing really very scenic at all. On the other hand, the shopping isn't bad. That's also about 1.5 kilometers away. And there's a big mall there with a giant supermarket and what's called a DIY store. It's not really a do-it-yourself store. It's more a kind of everything on the cheap, so you can get all kinds of kitchen stuff, garden stuff, electronics, everything, but very cheap. And clothing. Bought a pair of jeans yesterday for cheap. Yeah, that will be, I think, very useful, but I've not got many places where I can just go and walk. On the other hand, we've got 24-hour security, and so I can leave my bicycle outside, and it's not likely to get stolen, famous last words, whereas in my old apartment, I had to carry it up 2 flights of stairs to my apartment because there was a danger of it being stolen or of parts being stolen. I had the saddle stolen one time. Very much of a nuisance to carry it up and down stairs. I don't have to do anything here. I just put it in the bike shed, lock it up, all set night and day. Also, I've got a 24-hour manager. It's quiet here. My old apartment used to be really, really quiet when I first moved in 2.5 years ago. And then they started building. They knocked down some of the older buildings and they started building up new ones, and there was always noise all day for over a year. So what started out good turned not so good. So here's the thing about change. I'll get off my apartment and talk about change in general, is that change is inevitable. Even when you've got a good situation, it can turn bad in a heartbeat. There are all kinds of things that change. Your body changes. I know that very well. That when I was younger, I could do things that I can't do now. That's just an inevitable part of life. And the question is, what are you going to do about change? That's the key question. Change is inevitable. What will you do about it? Now, some people will say that all change is good. Some people will say all change is bad. But I think most people will say, well, it kind of depends on the change. And let's start with getting older. A lot of people will say that getting older is just bad. I don't think that. I really feel as if getting older, for me, is getting better. Maybe I am like a prize wine that just my vintage gets better with age. I don't know. But my life is an awful lot better now than it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. I mean, there were good things that happened at that time, but on average, my life is a lot better now than it's ever been before. So I'm quite happy with getting older. And I'm not really all that worried about the fact that I look older, because it doesn't really matter to me. I wonder about change around me. I've often thought about this in terms of looking back. You know, like I grew up in the 50s and 60s of the 20th century, and they were, in my hindsight, simpler times. When I was a little boy in Australia, we lived in a development, a new development that was growing all the time. And Monday to Friday I went to school, and Saturday had breakfast, you know, went out on the streets, which were pretty empty, because not very many people had cars, one per family, and they didn't really use them on the weekends. So it was pretty much open space. There was a big paddock all around us, with various trees and weeds. And we could just play anywhere. We could play in new building sites. So we would just basically play all morning, and then our mothers would, at lunchtime, yell our names, and somebody would say, hey, your mom's calling, and we'd trot home and have lunch, and then we'd go back out for the afternoon. Didn't have any television, didn't exist in South Australia until I was about, I think, 10 years old. We had a radio, and we would listen to some radio dramas sometimes. We didn't have a telephone. We never had a telephone in the house any of the time that I lived in Australia. So, you know, forget mobile phones or smartphones. We just didn't have a telephone. That was the end of it. And that meant that people, instead of calling us, would visit us. Sunday afternoon was a typical time for people to just drop by. And we could expect that most Sundays, had no idea. Now, I can say those were simpler times. But you have to remember that in the 50s, I was very young. You know, my earliest memories of 4 years old. At the end of the 50s, I was 10 years old. They were simpler times because I didn't have a lot to do, a lot of worries. I had to worry about getting past my exams every week and every year, big exams, and so I had those worries, but I didn't have a car. I didn't have a mortgage. I didn't have all the things that adults had to worry about. So I can't say that the 50s in general were simpler times. I can say they were simpler for me, but were they simpler because technology was simpler, or were they simpler because I was younger? I don't know. Don't hanker after those times. I don't want those times. I like the changes that have happened. I like the internet. I like smartphones. I like digital cameras. I like it all. But I also liked those times when I was younger. I'm not going to present an opinion about whether they were better than now or worse than now. I don't think they were any better or any worse. They were just different. So some change, we can say, is about being different. It's not about improving or devolving in some way. But I will again ask the general question, what do you do when things change? I'm going to continue this discussion, I expect, next week. But I'm going to start off with a simple idea that if you imagine time as being something like a big river that is constantly flowing, that means that it's constantly changing. Now, what are you doing? Are you swimming upstream against the flow of the water? Or are you being carried down with the flow? Those are two obvious choices. Or are you somehow navigating your own boat, sometimes going up, sometimes going down, maybe sometimes stopping, sometimes going sideways? What are you doing? Now that is the question that I want to explore more fully in my next video. What do you do with change? Do you embrace it? Do you enjoy it? Do you resist it? And what I suspect is that some change you find good and some change you don't find good. So that's the final question. What change do you find beneficial and what change do you resist? So that's our start in my new environment. If you have enjoyed this, then of course like and subscribe and tell your friends. And I will be back on Tuesday with an actual cooking video, and on Friday we'll continue this series on change. Bye.